I'm going to need you to gather your things and leave this area right now." The words landed in the quiet of the flagship lounge like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples outward through the warm amber light and the low hum of the terminal's recycled air, and every head within earshot turned just slightly, with the careful sideways attention of people who wanted to watch without being seen watching. Mark Donovan stood at the edge of the seating area with his arms loosely crossed and his platinum blonde hair catching the overhead light in a way that made it look almost metallic, almost deliberate, like a uniform in itself. And the expression on his face was not angry, not flustered, not uncertain in any of the ways that a person looks when they have made a mistake and know it, but rather the smooth, practiced expression of a man who has done this before, many times before, and has always walked away from it clean. He was in his late 40s, wearing the Transcon Air supervisor's vest over a shirt pressed so sharply it seemed to resist the natural movement of his body, and his pale blue eyes moved over the lounge with the quiet authority of a man who considered himself its curator, its keeper of order. And right now, that order had been disrupted by the presence of the woman sitting 3 feet in front of him, her laptop open, her carry-on tucked precisely beneath the low table, a half-finished bottle of water to her left, and a phone to her right, existing in this space as if she had every right to be there. Which was exactly the thing that had made him stop walking when he first crossed the threshold 5 minutes ago and scan the room and land on her and feel somewhere behind his sternum a low, wordless irritation he would have called instinct. Dr. Evelyn Carter did not immediately look up. Her hand stilled on the keyboard. The cursor on her screen blinked once, twice, 3 times in the silence, and she drew one slow breath through her nose before she lifted her eyes to the man standing over her, taking in the vest, the name tag, the set of his jaw, the specific quality of entitlement in his posture that she recognized, the way you recognize weather before it arrives, that familiar pressure drop before the storm, the tax, as she had come to call it privately, the exhausting, unasked-for toll that certain spaces extracted from her simply for existing in them without permission that anyone had thought to ask her about. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice was perfectly even. "This lounge is for first-class passengers and Diamond Tier members," Donovan said, and he said it just loud enough, just a half decibel above what the conversation required, so that the businessman 2 seats away looked up from his newspaper, and the woman near the charging station paused, her scrolling a small audience assembled without a single word being wasted. "If your guest pass has expired, you'll need to clear the area before boarding begins." Evelyn held up her phone without standing, without leaning forward, without any of the apologetic body language that the moment seemed to be designed to produce. The screen showed her boarding pass clearly, the name reading Dr. Evelyn Carter, Seat 5A Priority Tier. And she watched Donovan squint at it with an expression not of relief but of annoyance, as though her legitimacy was a personal inconvenience he hadn't budgeted for. "Fine," he said after a pause, half a beat too long. "Boarding for Flight 815 has started. You should head down." He didn't say it to be helpful. The words were shaped like information, but carried like a dismissal, and Evelyn understood, as she always understood, the precise difference between the two. She gathered her leather tote, which had cost more than Donovan's monthly salary, though she had never once thought about it that way until moments like this made the arithmetic unavoidable, and said, "Thank you for your assistance," in a tone as smooth and cold as polished stone. And she walked out of the lounge without looking back, though she could feel his gaze following her all the way to the corridor, and something in the quality of that gaze told her with a certainty she had learned not to dismiss that this was not over. Behind her, Donovan stood very still for a long moment, watching the doorway she had passed through, and then he turned and walked back to his operations podium near Gate 42B, a small, hard thing settling in his chest like a decision waiting to be made. There are 3 images Evelyn Carter returned to when she needed to remember what she was made of, and none of them involved boardrooms or magazine covers or the clean, glittering moment of success that other people seemed to imagine when they thought about what her life must feel like from the inside. The first was a rented room in Detroit when she was 22 years old, her desk covered in circuit diagrams and cold takeout containers, and pages of handwritten equations that her professor had told her were ambitious to the point of impracticality, which she had understood even then to mean that the problem wasn't the math was fine, the math was beautiful. The problem was the person doing it and the expectations that came attached to that person, like luggage she had never packed. The second was a funding meeting. 7 years later, the third one that month, when a venture partner in a very good suit had leaned back in his chair with the relaxed confidence of a man who has never once had to prove his right to be in a room, and said that the technology was interesting, but that he wasn't sure the leadership had the gravitas the investment required. And she had walked out of that building and stood on the sidewalk in the November cold, and decided with a clarity that felt almost physical that she was going to build something so undeniable that no one would ever say that word to her again. The third image was recent her own face on the cover of Forbes, the headline reading, "The Woman Rebuilding the Stars," and she kept it not out of vanity but as a kind of evidence proof of a distance traveled that she sometimes needed to hold in her hands. Astronova Dynamics had been built over 14 years through 7 funding rounds, 3 near collapses, 1 patent dispute that had cost her 18 months and very nearly her sanity, and the sustained, bone-deep effort of 10,000 people who believed in what she was building. And today, if she could get from LAX to a boardroom in Midtown Manhattan by 7 in the evening, all of it every late night and every dismissive meeting and every room she had ever been asked to leave would compound into something that changed the industry permanently. Project Orion was not simply a merger, it was a framework for the next generation of satellite-based quantum communication, and the KKR board waiting for her in New York had the capital and the reach to launch it into a reality that would touch every corner of the connected world. The board is nervous, her CFO, Richard, had said through her AirPods as she packed her bag in the lounge, his voice carrying the particular tightness of a man watching a chessboard he cannot reach. Helios is spreading rumors. They're saying the tech isn't stable. They're saying you're a figurehead. They're scared. Richard, she had said, let them be. Make sure the data packets are secure. She had ended the call, looked at her boarding pass one more time and stood up. At gate 42, B. Mark Donovan stood at his operations terminal and typed the name with 2 fingers. Slowly, the way a man types when he is not really looking for information, but wants the feeling of looking for it. And the system returned exactly what he already knew it would return: Carter Evelyn M. Seat, 5A priority tier. All checks cleared. He stared at the screen for a moment, the blue light of the monitor flat and neutral against his face, and then he looked up and watched the boarding line beginning to form near the gate door. Passengers queuing in the automatic bovine way of people who have done this 1,000 times, and somewhere near the middle of the line, her leather tote over one shoulder, was the woman from the lounge standing straight and quiet among the other travelers, as if she were alone in the space, as if the noise of the terminal existed on a frequency she had simply chosen not to tune into. Donovan did not think of himself as a prejudiced man. This was important to understand about him, because people like him rarely did he thought of himself as a man of pattern, recognition, a keeper of institutional order, a professional whose 14 years in terminal operations had given him what he considered an almost diagnostic ability to identify disruptions before they became problems. And something about this woman had flagged in that internal system of his from the moment he walked into the lounge, something he might have described, if pressed, as a wrongness of fit, an incongruity between person and place that his gut had logged even before his conscious mind had caught up. Nearby, Jamie, the youngest of the cabin crew, 26 and still in her first year on the long-haul routes, was gathering her service cart near the jet bridge door, and she glanced at Donovan's face as she passed, caught the quality of his focus, the direction of it, and felt a small cold thing settle in her stomach that she did not yet have the language or the rank to name out loud. Donovan turned back to his terminal. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. The override function, a code designed for genuine security emergencies, for real threats, for the rare and serious moments when the system needed human intervention, sat one keystroke away, and the decision, as he would later be unable to convincingly claim, had already been made. The first-class cabin of Flight 815 had that particular quality of expensive quiet that Evelyn had never quite stopped noticing, even after years of traveling in it, the muted palette of cream and slate, the leather that smelled faintly of something meant to suggest stability and money, the soft downlighting that made everyone look, regardless of how their morning had gone, like they were already somewhere better than wherever they had just come from. Maria, the lead flight attendant, greeted her at the cabin entrance with a warmth that was professional but not performed. "Welcome aboard, Doctor. Carter seat 5. A is right here. Can I bring you anything before we push back?" And Evelyn thanked her and settled in, tucking her tote under the seat in front, plugging in her laptop, pressing her AirPods into place and allowing the particular shift in her posture that she thought of as switching modes. The subtle straightening of the spine, the setting of the jaw, the feeling of everything non-essential being filed away, and the part of her brain that had built a company from a rented room in Detroit coming fully online. She had been working for perhaps 4 minutes when she heard the voice. It came from the galley entrance, bright and carrying and shaped by a lifetime of rooms that had always quieted when it wanted them to, and it belonged to a woman somewhere in her late 50s with bleach blonde hair, teased into a volume that seemed to be making a statement. Costume jewelry catching the cabin light at every angle, and a carry-on bag significantly larger than the posted dimensions being argued about with the patient professional Maria, as if the measurement were a matter of opinion. "My medication is in this bag," the woman Sandra Whitmore, though Evelyn did not yet know her name, was saying, her voice pitched for the gallery rather than the conversation. "I have been a platinum member for 11 years. 11 years. And now you're telling me?" Then she saw Evelyn's suite, looked inside, looked at the neat leather tote sitting small and compliant under the forward seat, and her eyes did a calculation that took less than a second before she was pointing and saying to Maria with the breezy certainty of someone who has never once considered that other people's space might not be available for reallocation. "Well, why can't it just go in there? She's only got one tiny bag. Some people are so selfish." The words landed in the cabin and expanded in the silence that followed them, and several passengers in nearby seats very carefully did not look up from their phones. From the row directly behind Evelyn, a small voice, clear and carrying in the way that children's voices are, when they are genuinely asking rather than performing a question, said Mama. "Why does that lady want to take the other lady's space, if the other lady is sitting right there?" Evelyn did not turn around, but she heard it, and something in her chest tightened. Not with anger, not quite, but with the specific exhausting sorrow of a question that a 9-year-old should not already have to know the answer to. He appeared in the cabin entrance 3 minutes later, drawn, or so he would later claim, by the report of a boarding disruption, though the boarding disruption in question had already been quietly resolved by Maria, who had offered to gate-check Sandra Whitmore's bag, and had received in response a furious silence that was in the world of flight attendant negotiations, basically a yes. But Donovan was not there for the bag. His eyes moved through the cabin with the swift, practiced scan of a man conducting an assessment, and they found Evelyn in seat 5A, within 4 seconds of stepping through the doorway, and the assessment, such as it was complete. He walked to Sandra Whitmore first, briefly establishing a rapport, giving her a nod that said, "I see you. I am here. Your concerns have been received," and then he turned to Evelyn's suite, and his voice, when he used it, was measured, and even in the way that a blade is measured and even. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass and a valid ID." Evelyn looked up from her laptop. "I was scanned at the gate," she said. "I showed my boarding pass in the lounge. This is my assigned seat, and I am a ticketed passenger on this aircraft." Each sentence was delivered without heat, without defensiveness, as simple statements of fact which they were. "I'm conducting a verification," Donovan said, and there was something in the way he said it, the careful blankness of it, that told Evelyn this was not procedural, that there was no checklist being followed here, no protocol being applied even-handedly to every passenger on the plane. "You don't have authority to conduct passenger verification on board," she said. "That authority belongs to the flight crew. You are ground staff." Something moved behind Donovan's eyes. Not anger, not quite, but the specific micro-expression of a man whose script has been interrupted before he has reached the part he has been building toward, and then it settled back into blankness. "I have a report," he said loudly enough now that the nearest 4 rows could hear him without trying of a potential security flag on this passenger's ticket. The system flagged it approximately. "What system?" Evelyn said, and it was not a question. "The ground operations terminal. It's a live system. It overrides the gate scan." He reached for his radio. "I'm going to need you to deplane voluntarily while we sort this out. If you cooperate now, we can handle this quietly." The cabin had gone very still. Not the natural stillness of people minding their own business. The conscious charged stillness of a room that has chosen to pay attention and is holding its breath about what to do with what it is witnessing. The first phone was raised somewhere in the middle rows, its screen dark, its camera pointed forward. Then a second, then a third. "You are lying," Evelyn said, and her voice did not rise even a fraction of a decibel, which somehow made the words more absolute rather than less. "You are fabricating a security flag, and that is a federal offense. I am not moving. Please leave this aircraft so that this flight can depart." Donovan lifted the radio to his mouth. "This is Donovan at Gate 42B. I need 2 officers to Flight 815, non-compliant passenger in 5A. In the row directly behind Evelyn, a small hand reached out and found its mother's sleeve and held on. The cockpit door opened. In the 7 seconds between Donovan ending his radio call and the response crackling back through the static, the cabin of Flight 815 was as quiet as a held breath. And Evelyn Carter sat in seat 5A, with her hands resting flat and open on the armrests, and her eyes fixed on Mark Donovan with an expression that gave him absolutely nothing to work with. She had learned the art of the open hands, the deliberate stillness, not in any boardroom or negotiation seminar, but in a conversation with her mother 20 years ago. Her mother who had spent 31 years working in spaces that required her to make herself smaller, to be tolerated in them. And who had said one evening over the kitchen table in Detroit, "The moment you flinch, Evelyn, you give them the story they came for. Don't give them the story. Make them write their own." Donovan was writing his now, and everyone in the cabin was watching him do it. "I'm giving you one final opportunity," he said, and the words had the brittle quality of authority that knows it is being observed and is performing its own certainty because the actual certainty has begun to leak. Deplane voluntarily, or when those officers arrive, this becomes a federal interference matter. That goes on a record. That follows you. "What follows me?" Evelyn said, still not moving, still not raising her voice, is 14 years of building a company that employs 10,000 people. "What follows you? Mr. Donovan, is what you are doing right now in front of every person on this aircraft." She paused for one beat. "Now, what is the specific code for this flag?" The question was simple, and its simplicity was devastating because there was no code, and they both knew there was no code, and the cabin knew in the particular way that crowds know things without being told that the absence of an answer to a simple question is itself an answer. Donovan said nothing. From seat 5B, a man in a rumpled suit, Arthur Webb, managing director, late 40s, the kind of face that had seen enough of the world to know when it was watching something. it would be telling people about for years, leaned slightly into the aisle and said quietly but distinctly, "He can't answer because there isn't one." "Sir, this doesn't concern you," Donovan said, turning, and the sharpness of the pivot told everyone exactly how much it did concern him. "I have a clear view, and I've been recording for 4 minutes," Arthur said, and held up his phone so that Donovan could see the red dot. The 2 airport police officers appeared at the aircraft door at that exact moment, stepping into the threshold and taking in the scene: the supervisor, the seated woman, the watching cabin, the raised phones, and before anyone could speak, the cockpit door swung open and Captain James Broward stepped out. He was not a dramatic man. James Broward, 31 years in the air, had burned away most of the unnecessary things, and what remained was a quality of quiet that people often mistook for stillness, but was actually the opposite, was in fact a very focused kind of motion happening entirely below the surface, the way deep water moves. And he stepped out of the cockpit now, without urgency, without theater, his cap on, and his jacket buttoned, and the 4 gold stripes on his shoulders doing their quiet work of communication before he had said a single word. He did not look at Evelyn first. He looked at Donovan. "Mr. Donovan," he said, and the 2 words had the weight of a question being asked very carefully by someone who has already guessed the answer and is giving the other person the courtesy of a moment to choose something better. "What is the cause of this delay?" Donovan recalibrated slightly by the captain's appearance, straightened his vest, and adopted the tone of a man reporting a situation rather than orchestrating one. "Captain Broward, glad you're here. This passenger in 5A has a live security flag on her ticket. She's been non-compliant with my request to deplane for verification, and I've called for officers to facilitate removal." Captain Broward held up the manifest he was carrying, a single printed sheet, crisp from the printer in the cockpit, and read from it with the unhurried precision of a man who has learned that there is no substitute for the primary document. "Carter Evelyn, Seat 5, A, Priority Tier, cleared by TSA, cleared by FAA, cleared on my ready-to-fly list, which was finalized after all pre-departure security checks." He looked up. "She is my passenger, and she is cleared." "The ground system shows a live flag," Donovan said, and there was the first hair-thin fracture in his composure, barely audible but present. "The live system overrides the manifest." "You know that, Captain." "What I know," Broward said, and he took one deliberate step closer, not aggressive, just closing the performative distance that Donovan had been using as a stage, "is that Transcon Air operates 3 security flag categories: S-Check Crew Alert and TSA Hold. All 3 have specific codes. All 3 generate a visible notation on the gate record, the manifest, and the flight crew terminal." He paused. "I'm looking at a manifest with no notation. I'm looking at a gate record with no notation. So I'd like you to tell me very specifically what the code is for the flag your system is showing." The question occupied the air of the cabin like a physical object. Donovan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. It's an internal level designation. I can't disclose the specific." "There is no internal level designation in Transcon security protocol," Broward said, and his voice had dropped half a register in a way that made it quieter and considerably more dangerous. "I have been flying this airline for 19 years. That classification does not exist." He looked at Donovan for a long moment, not with contempt, or not only with contempt, but with the particular sadness of a person who had hoped on some level to be surprised by what they found. "You invented it." The 2 officers at the doorway had not moved. They were watching the captain with the careful attention of people recalibrating their understanding of a situation in real time. Donovan said, "You cannot speak to me this way. I am the duty operations manager." "I will have your my flight log," Breward said, cutting him cleanly across. "Will read that this departure was delayed by a ground supervisor who fabricated a security classification to remove a cleared, legitimate passenger from a ticketed seat." That is the record. You have 60 seconds to leave my aircraft before I am the one calling the officers for you." The two airport police officers, a broad-shouldered man named Ramirez and a woman named Officer Daniels, whose posture communicated without ambiguity that she had not come to this aircraft to be anyone's prop, stepped fully into the cabin doorway, and Ramirez said in the measured, neutral voice of someone who has been in enough rooms like this one to know that the truth always declares itself eventually. "We received a call for a non-compliant passenger. Can someone tell me what's actually going on here?" Donovan moved toward them first, which was a mistake because it made him look like a man with an argument to win rather than a fact to report, and Broward's stillness in contrast made him look like the person who already knew how this ended. "Officers, this passenger in 5A has a security flag on her ticket and has refused my instruction to—" Captain Officer Daniels said, looking past Donovan with the practiced diplomatic accuracy of someone who has learned to navigate competing authorities by identifying the legitimate one. "Can you clarify the situation from your end?" "I can," Broward said. "Dr. Carter in 5A is a fully cleared ticketed passenger on this aircraft. Mr. Donovan is ground staff who has boarded without flight crew authorization, has made a verbal claim of a security flag that does not correspond to any real classification in this airline's protocol, and has called for passenger removal on the basis of what is, to my professional assessment, a fabricated allegation." He was quiet for a beat. "I've asked him to leave. He hasn't." Ramirez looked at Donovan. "What's the flag code, sir?" The question was the same one Broward had already asked, and the silence that followed it was of a different quality than the last one. It had weight, now institutional weight, the weight of two officers who had just heard a captain call something fabricated and were waiting to be corrected. "It's an internal, the system was." Donovan stopped. The glitch explanation was still available technically, but the room had changed shape around it, and everyone could see that it no longer fit. From seat 5B, Arthur Webb stood. Not dramatically. Just stood. The way a person stands when they have decided that the appropriate response to a moment is to be in it rather than beside it, and said, "I have been recording since before Mr. Donovan called the officers." The recording includes his failure to name a flag code when first asked by the passenger, his escalation to a removal call, and this entire exchange with Captain Broward. "I'll provide it to whoever needs it." Jamie, the youngest flight attendant, stepped out of the galley doorway where she had been standing with her hand flat against the wall for the last 4 minutes, and she looked at Officer Daniels and said, her voice steady despite the visible effort it cost her to make it so. "I saw it. All of it. He was never here about a flag." Donovan turned to find Evelyn Carter already holding her phone. "My name," Evelyn said. And she said it to Officer Ramirez, but she said it in the full hearing of the cabin, without theater, simply as a statement of record, is Dr. Evelyn Carter. She watched Arthur Webb in seat 5B glance down at his phone as she said it, watched his thumbs move across the screen, watched his expression change in the particular way that expressions change when a search result returns something larger than you were prepared, for a small widening of the eyes, a fractional stillness of the hands, and then the look of a man rearranging his understanding of the room he is standing in. Donovan, who had not Googled anything, who had not needed to, because the whole architecture of his certainty had been built on the premise that he already knew everything. Relevant was watching her with the particular expression of a man who feels the ground shifting, but cannot yet identify which direction it is shifting toward. Evelyn held up her phone, her first phone. The personal one turned to the screen that was open and visible to anyone standing within 6 feet, and she said, "This is the Transcon Air leadership page. This is a photograph of your CEO, Mr. Thomas Hale." She turned the screen so Donovan could see it. "I'd like you to look at it carefully, because in approximately 30 seconds that is the man your actions today are going to be explained to." She held up her second phone. The screen was lit with an active call. The name displayed read, Diane Office of the CEO Transcon Air. The cabin of Flight 815 became the kind of quiet that happens when a room collectively stops performing its normalcy and simply watches. Donovan stared at the screen. His lips parted. The color moved in his face in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. That's not... He stopped. Started again. You don't just have the CEO's office on Astronova Dynamics, Evelyn said. And the two words dropped into the room like stones into deep water, and the rings moved outward and touched every edge as in the process of finalizing a corporate travel contract with Transcon Air. The contract value is $50 million over 3 years. Diane has been expecting my call today to confirm the final terms. She paused, and the pause was not theatrical, but simply functional. The pause of a woman giving a man the exact amount of time required to understand what he has done. I think instead I'll talk to her about this. From Seat 5B. Arthur Webb made a sound, not a word. Just the involuntary sound of a man whose search results have just confirmed something extraordinary, and he stood up and turned his phone so that the people nearest to him could see the screen and the Forbes cover that was open on it, and the headline and the face. The face matched the woman in seat 5A exactly. Dr. Evelyn Carter. The woman rebuilding the stars. The information moved through the cabin in a wave not loud, not chaotic, but inexorable. The way truth moves through a room once it has finally been allowed in. And Evelyn watched it reach Donovan and watched what it did to him, watched the architecture of his certainty come apart piece by piece, the performance of authority collapsing into something smaller and uglier and much more honest, and she felt no satisfaction in it, only a very tired kind of clarity. He lunged for her phone. It was not a calculated move, it was a reflex. The desperate reflex of a man who understood in one crystalline, terrible moment that the call could not be allowed to connect, that Diane answering would be the end of something he could not stop by any other means. And his hand reached across the space between them, and Officer Ramirez was already moving, already had Donovan's arm, already had him turned and pressed against the forward bulkhead in a single practiced motion before Donovan's fingers had come within a foot of the device. "Don't move," Ramirez said. Evelyn raised the phone to her ear. "Diane," she said, her voice as level as it had been at the beginning of all of this, which now felt like a very long time ago. "It's Dr. Carter. I'm on flight 815 at LAX. I'm afraid we have a situation. Could you put Mr. Hale through?" "Yes, I'll hold." The sound of handcuffs was very loud in the quiet cabin. They walked him out slowly, Ramirez and Daniels one on each side, and Donovan was still talking, still explaining, still reaching for the language of procedure and protocol as if the right combination of words might yet reassemble what had come apart. But no one in the cabin was listening anymore, and the sound of his voice became smaller and less coherent with each step toward the door until it disappeared entirely into the jet bridge, and the silence that replaced it had a completely different quality than the silence that had preceded it, the way the air in a room changes after a storm has passed through it. Sandra Whitmore was very still in her seat near the galley, her oversized carry-on sitting on the floor beside her like an accusation, her platinum blonde hair slightly flattened on one side from leaning against the bulkhead for the last 20 minutes. And her expression had the specific quality of a person who has understood with considerable delay that the role they thought they were playing in a situation was not the role they were actually playing. Evelyn watched the doorway for a moment after Donovan was gone, and then she looked down at her own hands open on the armrests, still exactly as she had held them throughout, and she closed them once briefly and opened them again. "Is she going to be okay now?" The voice came from directly behind her, small, clear, with the particular earnestness of a 9-year-old who has been holding a question in for a very long time and has decided that the moment has arrived to let it out. And Evelyn turned slowly for the first time since the child had first spoken, what felt like hours ago. The girl was sitting very straight in her seat, hands folded in her lap, and she was looking at Evelyn with dark, serious eyes that held in them the specific quality of attention that children have before the world teaches them to filter it open and complete, and taking in everything without deciding in advance what it meant. "Is she okay now?" Mama Lily said again, not to Evelyn, but to her mother, who was sitting beside her with a hand still resting on her daughter's knee, and who looked at Evelyn with an expression that was part apology and part something else, something that had no clean name. Evelyn looked at Lily for a long moment, and for the first time since she had walked into the LAX lounge that morning, something moved in her face that she had not planned, had not calculated, had not chosen to let through something soft and unguarded and completely real there for exactly 1 second before she turned back to the front. "Yes," she said quietly, and it was not entirely clear who she was answering. Captain Broward's voice came over the intercom. "Flight attendants, prepare for departure." They broke through the low marine layer over the Pacific side of the basin at 11:47 in the morning, and the light that poured through the oval windows as they climbed changed from the gray-white of coastal fog to a clean and brilliant gold that had the particular intensity of California sunshine above the clouds, the kind of light that is indifferent to everything that has happened below it. And Evelyn watched it for a moment before she unbuckled her belt and walked toward the forward lavatory, not because she needed to, but because she needed 60 seconds in a room where no one was watching. The lavatory was small and lit too brightly and smelled of the recycled lavender-adjacent cleaner that all aircraft lavatories smelled of, and she stood at the sink and held the edge of the counter with both hands and looked at herself in the mirror, and noticed for the first time since the terminal that there was a slight tension in the muscles along her jaw that hadn't been there this morning, a tightness she had been carrying without registering it, the way you carry a bag that has been on your shoulder long enough to stop feeling like weight and starts feeling like just the shape of your body. Her hands, she noticed, were not entirely steady. She turned on the cold water and held her wrists under it for 15 seconds and thought with a vividness that surprised her. Of her mother, not the version of her mother that existed in polished memory, composed and quotable, but the real one. The one who had gotten up at 5:15 every morning for 3 decades to go to a job in a building where she was required to be twice as prepared and half as demanding as everyone around her to be considered equally competent, the one who had stood in the kitchen in Detroit and looked at her daughter and said, "The room will always try to tell you who you are, baby. You just have to already know." Evelyn turned off the water. She dried her hands with the paper towel and dropped it in the bin and stood for 1 more second looking at herself at the woman in the mirror who had not moved from her seat, who had not raised her voice, who had not given them the story they came for, and felt alongside the exhaustion and the residual adrenaline and the grief that always lived underneath. Moments like this one, something that was not quite pride, but was its quieter, more durable cousin. When she came out, Maria was standing near the galley entrance, and their eyes met for just a moment. And Maria did not say anything, because there was nothing to say, that the look did not already contain acknowledgement and solidarity, and the particular understanding that passes between 2 women who have been measured against a standard that was built without them in mind. Evelyn sat down and opened her laptop. This time her hands were steady. The message from Richard arrived 11 minutes into the flight, and Evelyn read it twice before she understood what it was actually telling her, not because the words were unclear, but because the specific shape of the damage they described was almost admirably precise, the kind of precision that does not happen by accident. "Evelyn, something is spreading fast. Videos from the plane are out, but they're blurry bad angles. The story running right now is disruptive passenger removed from first-class flight. Your name is in it. Helios is feeding it to the KKR contacts. Board has invoked the character clause. The 7 o'clock meeting may be off." She set the phone down on the tray table and looked at it for a moment. The thing about the second attack, and she recognized it immediately as a second attack, a coordinated follow-on to the first, which meant that what had happened on this aircraft this morning had not been entirely spontaneous, had not been solely the product of one petty man's prejudice, but had been anticipated by people with better resources and longer planning horizons than Mark Donovan. The thing about it was its elegance in the cold and ugly way that some things are elegant, the way a trap is elegant. She had been placed in a situation where the bare facts, stripped of context, stripped of the reason she was sitting in seat 5A and the fabricated nature of the flag and the testimony of the captain and the flight crew would produce a headline that her rivals had been waiting months to write. CEO behaves badly on plane. It didn't matter that it was false. It didn't need to be true. It only needed to run for 48 hours in the right inboxes before the 7 o'clock meeting and the KKR board, who were already nervous and already being fed contradictory information by Helios Innovations, would have sufficient cover to delay, and a delay was all her competition needed. She picked up her phone and typed back to Richard. The story is wrong. Donovan fabricated the flag. He was arrested on the aircraft. Captain Broward confirmed it on record. Arthur Webb in 5B has clean footage of the entire exchange. 10 minutes clear audio. Get PR online and tell them to wait for the file. Don't put anything out until I send it. And Richard call the KKR chairman's office directly. Not through the board. Directly. Tell them I will be there at 7. She sent the message and set the phone face down on the tray. Outside the window, 30,000 feet below California had given way to the brown and amber geometry of the desert interior, and somewhere down there in all that flat and featureless distance, the machinery of her rival's strategy was running, and she felt the particular quality of anger that she had learned over the years to neither suppress nor be consumed by, but to carry the way a current carries something, keeping it moving, keeping it directional, channeling its energy toward the thing she was building rather than the thing she was fighting. They handed me the story, she thought, staring at the clouds. The narrative that was running right now. Woman removed from plane, CEO, under fire character in question could be reversed completely and permanently by 12 minutes of clear video and a captain's written report, and she knew exactly where both of those things were. She unbuckled her belt. Arthur Webb had the look of a man who had been mentally composing the story he was going to tell at dinner parties for the rest of his life, and he was in the middle of watching it trend on his phone when Evelyn appeared in the aisle beside him and said his name quietly, and he looked up with an expression that was equal parts startled and ready. "I have it," he said before she had asked. "The whole thing. I started recording when he first asked for your credentials, and I didn't stop until the handcuffs." He turned the phone toward her and pressed play, and she watched 30 seconds of it, long enough to see the audio quality, long enough to see Donovan's face when Broward named the flag categories, long enough to see the precise documented moment when the fabrication became undeniable, and she nodded. "Mr. Webb, Arthur. Arthur, I need you to send that file to an address I'm going to give you right now, and I need it to go to 3 additional contacts after that. What you have on that phone is not just footage of what happened to me this morning. It is the evidence that prevents this from happening to whoever sits in seat 5A next month and the month after that." She met his eyes. "You saw something real today. The file makes it real for everyone who wasn't here." Arthur Webb sent the file in 4 separate transfers over the next 7 minutes, narrating quietly as he did it, and Evelyn watched the narrative begin to shift in real time. Her PR team, acknowledging receipt, the first corrective headline appearing on an aviation trade site, then a mainstream outlet, then 2 more. The story reorienting around its actual subject with the speed that information moves when it is being pushed by clean primary evidence. Airline captain removes ground supervisor from plane after fabricated security flag. Transcon supervisor arrested for falsifying federal security classification. Watch captain defends black CEO from manager who invented security threat. Richard messaged her within 15 minutes. KKR chairman took the call. He's heard. He's asking us to confirm the 7 o'clock. I think you have it back. The stock ticker, which had dropped 3 points on the first narrative, had recovered and added 2 more by the time the food service began the market deciding with its characteristic bluntness which version of events it believed. Evelyn looked across at Arthur Webb, who was watching the coverage with the quiet satisfaction of a man who understood that he had done the right thing for reasons that had nothing to do with any of this, and she said, "Thank you. Not just for the video, for not looking away when it was easier to." Arthur looked slightly embarrassed by this, which meant she had said exactly the right thing. He came back from the cockpit at the 2-hour mark when the seatbelt sign was off, and the cabin had settled into the particular suspended domesticity of a long flight. The rustling of blankets and the blue glow of seat-back screens, and the small democratic equality of 30,000 feet where everyone is equally far from the ground. And he crouched slightly beside Evelyn's seat in the way that tall men in confined spaces learn to do, and said quietly, "How are you holding up?" "Better than I was in that lavatory an hour ago," she said, and he gave her the small, direct smile of a man who has learned not to offer reassurances that cost nothing. "I've filed my report," he said. "Full account, time-stamped, signed. It's already with the airline's legal and compliance divisions, and a copy has been submitted to the FAA. Whatever happens from here, the record is clean." "Thank you, James. You know the thing that bothers me most," he said, and he was quiet for a moment, looking at the seat back in front of them, as if something he wanted to say was written there, "is that he's done this before. I don't know I don't know how many times, but a man doesn't do what he did today that fluently, that quickly, with those specific tools the first time." "No," Evelyn agreed. "He doesn't. But today was the first time he did it to someone who could fight back," Broward said, and there was something in the way he said it that was not a compliment but an acknowledgement of a deep and ugly disparity, the specific sadness of a fair-minded man reckoning with the limits of what fairness can do in a world that has not been built around it. "It's going to be different going forward," Evelyn said, and she said it not as reassurance, but as a statement of intent, the kind of thing a person says when they have already made the decision and are only now finding the words for it. Broward looked at her for a moment, then stood. "Good luck tonight, Doctor?" "It won't be luck," she said. He laughed once, genuine, and went back to his cockpit, and she opened her laptop and got to work. The wheels of Flight 815 touched the runway at JFK at 5:43 in the evening, and the descent had been smooth enough that several passengers had barely looked up from what they were doing, but as the plane taxied to the gate and the familiar sequence of chimes and announcements began, Captain Broward's voice came over the intercom and said something that was not in any sequence and had not been scripted by anyone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we reach the gate, I want to take a moment to acknowledge something that happened on this flight today that you were all witness to. A passenger in seat 5A endured something that no passenger should ever endure on any aircraft, and she did so with a level of composure and dignity that I will not forget." A pause. "Dr. Evelyn Carter, on behalf of this crew, it has been an honor to fly with you. We hope to see you on board again soon." The applause began in first class and moved backward through the aircraft in a wave. And it was not polite applause, not the performative tapping of people going through a social motion. It was real and sustained, and had in it the quality of a crowd that has held something in for a long time and has been given permission to let it out, and it continued until the jetway connected, and the door opened, and Evelyn stood and gathered her tote and walked to the front of the plane where Maria was waiting with eyes that were, Evelyn noted, considerably brighter than they had been 12 hours ago. Thomas Hale was standing at the far end of the jet bridge. He was a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit, and he looked in this moment like neither the suit failing to do the work it had been purchased to do, his face carrying the expression of a man who has been watching a catastrophe unfold from a distance and has finally arrived at it, and found it worse up close than it appeared from where he was standing, and he was holding a bouquet of white flowers with both hands in the way that people hold things when they cannot think of what to do with their hands. And when he saw Evelyn coming toward him, he started talking before she had taken 3 steps toward him. She did not stop walking, and she did not take the flowers. Dr. Carter. Evelyn, I want you to know that what happened today is the single most horrifying incident in this company's recent history, and I take full personal responsibility for the culture that allowed it to mister. Hail, Evelyn said, and she said it the way you say someone's name when you need them to stop talking and listen. Instead, not unkindly, but with a finality that left no negotiating room on the question of who was in charge of this conversation. I have a meeting in Midtown in 73 minutes. Let's use the time we have. They walked together toward the terminal Hale, slightly behind, slightly off balance in the specific way of a powerful man who has found himself in a situation that his power is not equipped to resolve. And Evelyn spoke without preamble, the way she spoke in boardrooms, everything unnecessary already removed. Mark Donovan, she said. Where is he? FBI custody as of 2 hours ago, Hale said. Terminated effective immediately. The charges are, I know the charges. That's handled. She paused at the terminal door and looked at him directly. Sandra Whitmore. The passenger who initiated the confrontation. What is her status with Transcon? Hale blinked. We haven't yet. She's banned, Evelyn said. Lifetime. Effective today. Her account is flagged. Her name is on the disruption list, and that is not a request. Yes, absolutely. Done. Captain James Broward, she said. And something changed almost imperceptibly in her tone. Not softer exactly, but different in quality. The way a person's voice changes when they are speaking about something they mean rather than something they are transacting. He is the reason your airline is not currently the subject of a congressional inquiry. He is the reason I am walking into a boardroom tonight instead of a federal holding room. He will receive a formal commendation and a financial bonus that reflects the actual magnitude of what he did. And it will be public. Of course. Absolutely. And Transcon Air will make a contribution, a significant one, not a gesture, a real number that requires someone to feel it to a legal defense fund for passengers who face what I face today and don't have a direct line to the CEO's office. She held his gaze. Because most people don't. Hale was nodding with the urgent, continuous nod of a man who has understood that agreement is the only viable response available to him. Name the amount. My team will send the figure tonight, and the corporate travel contract with Astronova. She paused for exactly the right beat. Is not being canceled. It's being doubled, and I want 40% on the rate for 3 years. Thomas Hale went very still for a moment, and then he said, Done, because he was smart enough to understand that she had just saved his airline twice in 1 day, and this was what it cost. The NYPD escort was waiting at the curb. Evelyn got in the car. The KKR boardroom on the 50th floor occupied a corner of the building that gave it 2 full walls of glass and a view of the city that was at 6:58 in the evening with the last of the October light still holding in the western sky above the Hudson, genuinely, unironically beautiful. The kind of view that made you understand why people built things this tall and this expensive just to be able to look out from them at this particular angle. Bill Salter from Helios Innovations was already seated when Evelyn walked in, and his expression when she appeared in the doorway composed unhurried her laptop in one hand and her tote on one shoulder, looking like a woman who had not spent the last 11 hours being targeted, falsely accused and threatened with federal removal from a commercial aircraft went through 3 different states in rapid succession. Surprise recalibration and then the careful neutral surface of a man reassembling his approach, Dr. Carter, the KKR chairman said, rising. We're glad you made it. We heard about the incident. It's resolved, she said pleasantly, setting her laptop on the table, and she looked at Salter for a moment. Just a moment with the specific expression of a woman who has been underestimated so many times that it has stopped producing emotion and started producing data. Bill. Good to see you here. Sounds like you had quite a day, Salter said, and the attempt at commiseration had a thin, tightly controlled note of satisfaction underneath it that Evelyn had heard many times before. I did, she agreed. I find the difficult days useful. They clarify what matters. She opened her laptop. Shall we? For the next 55 minutes, Doctor. Evelyn Carter gave the most precise, the most complete, and the most undeniable presentation of her professional life, not because she was performing, not because the adrenaline of the day had unlocked something theatrical in her, but because 14 years of building something real from nothing had given her a relationship with this material that no amount of sabotage or distraction could touch, and the KKR board felt that the way a room feels the difference between performance and truth, and leaned toward it the way people lean toward warmth. When she finished, there was a silence of the kind that means the room has made its decision and is only catching up to the paperwork. The chairman looked at Bill Salter. You told us the technology was unstable and the leadership was a figurehead. He waited. I was, Salter said. There may have been some misrepresentation in my Project Orion, the chairman said, turning back to Evelyn. Full terms accepted, with an additional 15% valuation for what your team endured today to be in this room. Evelyn closed her laptop and, for a moment, just one, she let herself feel the full weight and the full distance of what she had traveled to reach this table, this city, this evening, this. Yes. Then she picked up her pen and signed. Project Orion launched 3 months later without a single complication, and the technology performed exactly as Evelyn had promised it would, which surprised no one who had been paying attention and confirmed everything that had been in doubt for the people who hadn't. And in the same week that the launch was covered on the front page of every major financial publication, a federal judge sentenced Mark Donovan to 4 years for falsifying a federal security document, the verdict delivered in a courtroom where his name had already become, in aviation circles, a kind of shorthand for the specific and corrosive danger of small authority wielded without conscience. The Seat 5A initiative funded by Evelyn's own wealth and a contribution from Transcon Air that had been, as she specified, large enough to require someone to feel it, opened its doors to its first 12 clients in the same month, offering legal support to passengers who had been discriminated against in travel and corporate spaces, and who had until now had nowhere to go with it, and Captain James Broward offered a promotion to Vice President of Flight Standards politely and without hesitation declined, saying only that his office had a better view from where it already was. Sandra Whitmore was not a bad person, which was in many ways the most complicated thing about her. She was a person who had never been required to look carefully at herself, who had moved through the world with the unexamined confidence of someone for whom the world had been arranged mostly in her favor. And the video that made her the face of a kind of casual, unreflective entitlement was a mirror she had not known she needed until she could not look away from it. Banned from the airline, reduced to a punchline she had not intended to become, she sat one night, weeks later, and watched the footage for the 15th time. And this time she did not watch herself. She watched the child in the row behind the small face turning at the sound of "some people are so selfish," and she understood in a way she could not undo or unfeel that the girl had not looked at Evelyn in that moment. She had looked at her. On Evelyn's next flight, London 3 months on, Maria appeared at her seat before takeoff and handed her a small envelope, a little crumpled at the corner with "For the lady in 5A" written on the front in a child's careful handwriting. Inside was a napkin from Flight 815, and on it, in blue ballpoint pen, uneven and earnest and completely without artifice, "When I grow up, I want to be like you, not because you are famous, because you didn't move. Evelyn folded the napkin once carefully and held it in her hand for a moment, and then she looked out the window at the evening sky above London, vast and dark and full of the particular indifferent beauty of things that have been there long before any of this, and will be there long after. And she thought of Lily and of her mother's kitchen in Detroit, and of every room she had ever been asked to leave, and she put the napkin in the front pocket of her tote, directly against her chest, where she would feel it, and she opened her laptop because there was still so much left to build. If this story moved you, if you believe that no one should have to fight this hard just to keep a seat that was already theirs, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story like this one. We'll see you in the next one.